At dawn, the message fell like a stone upon the table. From Washington it came, sharp, unbending, unforgiving. 48 hours. That was the decree. Surrender 60% of your gold, surrender 60% of your oil, or watch the dollar vanish from your hands, your markets cut, your arteries closed. No meeting, no negotiation, no appeal. 48 hours like chains, cold and heavy, fastened on the wrist of a nation. But in Ouagadougou, another hand wrote another decree. President Ibrahim Traoré did not bend. He did not plead. He signed. He stamped. And he declared his own time, his own measure, his own defiance. 72 hours. That was his line in the sand. 72 hours for the foreign powers to bow to Burkina Faso's law. Or the mines would close, the pipelines would halt, the doors of sovereignty would lock shut. Two clocks began to tick. One foreign, one African. Both live, both binding, both costly. And the question thunders before us, which clock shall rule the fate of a people? Will the 48 devour the 72, breaking a young nation's stand? Or will the 72 outlast the 48, showing Africa that freedom is not begged for, but enforced, hour by hour, breath by breath? This is no theater, brothers and sisters. This is collision. A collision between leverage and law, between empire and independence, between Washington's command and Ouagadougou's will. And every hour the sound grows louder, the tension sharper, the choice clearer. Stay with me, because what we are about to witness is not just politics. It is not just finance. It is the struggle of a people refusing to kneel. This is Traoré's 72-hour ultimatum, and it is a fire that burns against Trump's push for Africa's gold. So I ask you now, do not turn away. Do not scroll past. Subscribe, stay with us, and let us walk through the storm together. For when the clocks strike their final hour, the world will know whose time has truly come. The table was set before the world, not with bread, not with wine, but with demands written in steel. Washington's decree was blunt, merciless, and final. 48 hours. Hand over 60% of Burkina Faso's treasure, its gold, its oil, or be cast into financial exile. Not a suggestion, not a negotiation, but a command. No appeals to justice. No councils of reason. No meetings in glass towers. Just the cold weight of empire pressing down with the promise of ruin. Now, pause for a moment, my brothers and sisters. Feel the weight of that decree. Imagine it falling not on paper, but on the neck of a people. Imagine it pressed against the chest of a nation whose soil has bled for centuries, whose mines have been carved open by foreign hands, whose rivers of oil have been diverted to foreign tanks. And here again the voice of Washington saying, 48 hours. That is not partnership. That is not diplomacy. That is ownership cloaked in legality. That is control masquerading as order. But in Ouagadougou another voice rose. A voice unbent, unbroken, unafraid. President Ibrahim Traoré did not tremble when the message arrived. He did not rush to beg. He did not stumble into silence. Instead, he took up his pen and with ink that felt like fire, he wrote another decree. Not in the language of surrender, but in the tongue of sovereignty. His answer was clear: 72 hours. 72 hours for foreign companies to comply with Burkina Faso's law, to accept that the gold and the oil would be governed not from afar, but from the soil beneath their feet. 72 hours to sign new agreements, to operate on national terms or face the closing of mines, the halting of pipelines, the silencing of permits. No carve-outs, no extensions, no exceptions. And when Traoré signed, it was not improvisation. It was not theater. It was not a performance for cameras or applause. It was the culmination of months of preparation. Already the foreign privileges had been rolled back. Already the mining permits had been tightened. Already the operators who failed to comply had been cast out. Already the gold had been shifted under state control. Already the servers, the data, the lines of security had been brought back under national command. Hear me now, this was not the roar of a reckless man. This was the steady hand of a leader who had built the foundation before he lit the fire. So when the 48-hour demand came, Burkina Faso was not caught by surprise. It was ready. The response was not improvised. It was activated. Two clocks began to tick. One foreign, one African. The first backed by the global machinery of finance, the second by the will of a people who had endured too much to kneel again. The first carried the threat of frozen banks, severed wires, and stalled exports. The second carried the promise of mines closed, convoys halted, and sovereignty declared. Both clocks alive, both binding, both costly. And so the test began. Banks probed with test transfers. Trucks stood idle at checkpoints. Couriers carried sealed packets across the city. Lawyers drafted exits. Soldiers tightened their patrols. In homes and in markets, the whispers spread. Two clocks. Two ultimatums. Two futures colliding. By the 6th hour, the machinery of the 72-hour order was already grinding forward. 5 directives, stamped and signed, moved into the veins of the nation. Freeze exports. Audit every mine. Replace foreign security. Seize control of information. Bring the data home. Couriers carried sealed envelopes to mining headquarters. Phones rang in Ouagadougou. Operators read the words. Silence followed. But behind the silence, the clash had begun. For this was not theater. This was not words drifting on paper. This was the sound of sovereignty being tested in real time. And from the capital to the most distant gold site, the question rang louder. Which clock would decide the destiny of Burkina Faso? Two clocks were ticking, one built on empire, one built on defiance. But as the hours gathered, the weight of the 48 pressed harder. Could the 72 hold its ground, or would the pressure break it before it reached its hour of truth? By the 6th hour, the wheels of sovereignty were already turning. Couriers had delivered their packets. Mines had received their orders. Servers were seized and moved under state control. Convoys were stopped, drones circled the skies, stockpiles were logged. The silence was not the silence of peace, it was the silence before resistance. At the first sight, an IT manager refused to hand over the server keys. A state officer laid down a suspension notice on the desk. In one moment, the credentials changed hands. In one moment, the flow of data turned toward Ouagadougou. No shouting, no negotiation, no compromise. Just raw authority, quiet and final. By the 20th hour, the control room glowed with maps, markers, and reports. Green for compliance, yellow for hesitation, red for resistance. And though the green spread slowly, the red zones pulsed defiantly on the board. Burkina Faso was enforcing, but the resistance was real. Villagers guarded stockpiles overnight. Engineers converted drones into live surveillance nets. Elders opened radio channels to relay alerts. A nation was moving, not by decree alone, but by the will of its people. Yet outside the capital, another countdown thundered. The 48 hours of Washington. Everyone knew it. Every trader, every miner, every official. The foreign clock was ticking just as loudly as the African one. And when the 32nd hour struck, its power revealed itself. The test transfers through New York did not clear. The arteries of finance seized. The wires froze. The cash flow stopped. And with it, a quiet panic moved through the room. Trucks stood still. Exports froze. No dollars came. No revenue flowed. This was no bluff, no empty threat. This was the foreign machinery pressing down with invisible chains. Brothers and sisters, let us pause here, for in that moment, many would have surrendered. Many would have folded. Many would have looked at the frozen wires and said, "We cannot breathe without their channels." But not Ibrahim Traoré. He did not flinch. He did not bow. He ordered the backup grid engaged. Sahel banks. Regional barter. Gold for grain swaps. It was clumsy, it was raw, it was fragile, but it was life. The oxygen continued to flow even as the main artery was choked. And so the confrontation sharpened. Washington had cut with its blade, but Ouagadougou had bandaged with its own cloth. Yet the bleeding was not stopped. Shopkeepers counted smaller stacks of cash. Miners waited longer for wages. Truckers idled at depots. Fear sat heavy on the streets. Two clocks. Two pressures. One nation caught in between. By the 45th hour, the tension reached a fever pitch. Foreign media declared collapse. National radio declared resilience. In the markets, food prices rose. At the depots, fuel lines grew. In the homes, families whispered prayers. And in the palace, Traoré and his advisors read the brutal reports. Blocked payments, companies pulling out, sabotage confirmed. The test was not theoretical anymore, it was survival. Then the 48th hour struck. The point of impact. The dollar channel slammed shut. Banks confirmed frozen transfers. A foreign consortium suspended its operations. Traders whispered of collapse, and analysts called it the beginning of default. On paper, the foreign clock had won. On the street, it looked like suffocation. But hear me now, Traoré did not fold. Instead, he turned to the miners and the workers. Wages, he declared, would still be paid. Not in the blocked dollars, but in credits backed by gold, spendable in local markets. Primitive foreign media mocked. Survival, the people replied. A miner held his slip and said, "At least we are still working." Villagers cheered when trucks rerouted through Sahel partners brought grain to the stalls. Fragile. Imperfect. But functioning. Yes, the pressure of the 48 cut deep. Yes, the arteries were severed. But the 72 still beat. The will of the people still pulsed. And with every hour past 48, the question grew louder. Could the 72 outlast the empire's clock? Could a fragile system hold against the weight of global finance? The 48 had struck and the arteries bled. But the 72 still breathed. The clocks now clashed in open defiance. Which heartbeat would fail first, the empire's or the nation's? The 48-hour mark had passed, but its shadow lingered heavy on the land. Banks were frozen, wires blocked, companies retreating. The empire's hand had struck and its grip was merciless. Shops raised prices overnight. Taxi drivers refused long trips, afraid fuel would vanish before dawn. Markets thinned, traders hoarded, families whispered, "Has the 72 already failed?" But in the ministries, in the control rooms, in the villages, another story was being written. The pressure was real, yes. The disruption undeniable. But resilience sharpened with every hour. Miners guarded stockpiles through the night, armed not with rifles but with resolve. Elders kept radios alive, turning courtyards into command centers. Young engineers soldered wires, reprogrammed drones, and built a fragile web of surveillance that kept watch over the depots. The empire expected chaos. What it saw was order, rough, imperfect, but order nonetheless. For every wire that froze, another hand tightened its grip on the ground. For every convoy turned back, another village organized its guard. Burkina Faso was learning, adapting, surviving. And yet resistance was not only financial. It was also sabotage. A fire flared at a fuel depot, contained quickly, but traced back to hands tied to foreign contractors. Investigators followed the money, uncovering suspicious transfers, uncovering betrayal within. 2 officials were pulled from their posts, disgraced for siding with the demand of Washington. The message was sharp. Sovereignty has no room for traitors. Still, the tension was brutal. By the 50th hour, foreign media declared collapse, headlines shouting, "Burkina Faso on the brink." Analysts in Europe spoke of default, of failure, of inevitable surrender. But the streets told another story. Yes, the queues were long. Yes, the stacks of cash were thinner. But the people were not broken. They listened to the radios. They watched the mines. They guarded the trucks. They murmured to one another, "We are still here." And then came the test of survival. With the arteries cut, how would wages flow? How would food reach the stalls? Traoré answered with steel. Wages, he ordered, would be paid not in frozen dollars but in gold-backed credits. Crude, mocked the foreign press. Primitive, scoffed the analysts. But in the mining towns, relief swept through the workers. One miner lifted his payslip and said, "At least we are still working." Do you hear it, brothers and sisters? That is the voice of dignity, not despair. That is the voice of survival, not surrender. For while the empire mocked, the people endured. And in endurance, there is strength. Convoys rerouted through Sahel partners began to arrive. Grain rolled into Ouagadougou. Fuel depots refilled under armed watch. Medicine was delivered straight to hospitals. The empire had closed one channel, but another channel opened through the hands of neighbors. The arteries were bruised, but the blood still flowed. Still, the hours were heavy. Sabotage teams were caught tampering with substations. Arrests were made. Images of captured saboteurs were broadcast, spreading one message across the streets. Sabotage is punishable. Betrayal has no hiding place. Applause rippled through the markets, not loud but steady, cautious, real. The people saw that authority was not silent, not blind, not paralyzed. By the 55th hour, the control room was a hive of arguments. Advisors pressed their views. Should the government bend, grant concessions, offer relief to companies resisting? Or should it let them walk, proving to the world that Burkina Faso would not trade sovereignty for survival? The debate raged, but Traoré cut it short. This is a sovereignty test, he declared. If they cannot operate under our law, they will not operate here. His words were recorded, replayed, repeated in tea shops and courtyards. And each time the message sank deeper. Sovereignty was not to be bargained. The empire's blow had landed, but the nation still stood. Fragile, yes. Bruised, yes. But unbroken. And with each passing hour, the weight of the 72 grew heavier, the sense of defiance sharper, the belief stronger. The question spread in every heart, every home, every street. Can the 72 reach its final hour? Or will the 48 claim victory by grinding the system into collapse before the clock runs out? Brothers and sisters, the hourglass was still spilling, the pressure still mounting. Tell me, what do you believe? Does the system bend beneath the weight of the empire, or does it hold until the 72nd hour strikes? From the towers of Washington, the 48-hour demand was more than a threat. It was a test not only of Burkina Faso but of Africa itself. If Ouagadougou could be broken in 2 days, then the continent would think twice before standing tall. If a young nation could be bent beneath the dollar's weight, then every other government would remember the lesson. Sovereignty is a dream, finance is reality. American analysts spoke with cold certainty. By hour 48, the channels will close. By hour 72, the government will fold. That is the arithmetic of power. They framed the ultimatum not as aggression, but as stability, not as coercion, but as law. And foreign media echoed the chorus, announcing in headlines, "Burkina Faso on the brink. Investors flee, collapse imminent." But the story inside Africa was different. From Bamako to Niamey, from villages in Mali to markets in Niger, people listened and watched. They saw the sanctions. They heard the threats. And they understood the stakes. Because this was not just Burkina Faso's fight. It was the mirror of their own. And then, brothers and sisters, came the twist no one had predicted. As the 60th hour broke, a statement emerged from Niamey. Mali and Niger, shoulder to shoulder with Traoré, declared their shield. If Burkina Faso's dollar channels were frozen, the Sahel would settle in gold, would trade in regional currencies, would send convoys of grain, fuel, and medicine across the borders. Already, trucks rolled from Bamako and Niamey, horns blaring, guarded by soldiers, cheered by villages as they crossed into Burkina Faso. Do you see the shift? What the empire thought was a lonely stand became a regional wall. What the world called isolation became a bond of defiance. For the first time, the 48-hour demand looked fragile. For the first time, the 72-hour ultimatum looked larger than one man, larger than one nation. It looked like a seed of continental unity. And the cameras caught the image that the empire did not want to see. On the border, Ibrahim Traoré stood beside Sahel leaders, silent but unshaken, watching the first convoy cross. No speeches, no flags, no ceremony, just presence, just resolve, just proof. Analysts in Europe began to revise their models. Commentators who predicted collapse whispered of miscalculation. For if the 48-hour clock could not crush one nation but instead forged three into a block, then the arithmetic of power had changed. The empire was not facing a single clock anymore. It was facing a wall of clocks ticking in unison, each powered not by dollars but by defiance. And so as the world watched, the question no longer belonged only to Ouagadougou. It belonged to Washington, to Paris, to London. Could they afford to push harder? Could they risk breaking not just Burkina Faso, but igniting a regional shield that would echo across Africa? The map of power was shifting. The empire's clock still ticked, but it no longer ticked alone. Brothers and sisters, can a single ultimatum hold against a continent awakening? Hour 66? The world expected silence, but instead it saw movement. Convoys rolled through the night, headlights piercing the dark, engines carrying grain, fuel, medicine. Villages lined the roads, cheering as the trucks passed. In Ouagadougou, markets reopened, depots refilled, hospitals received supplies. What had been framed as collapse now looked like continuity. And then came the image that would not fade. Ibrahim Traoré, standing shoulder to shoulder with the leaders of Mali and Niger, watching as the first convoy crossed into Burkina Faso. No speeches, no banners, no applause, just presence. Silent, undeniable presence. A picture worth more than declarations, worth more than propaganda. For it told the people, we are not alone, we are not forsaken, we are defended. By the 70th hour, the narrative had flipped. The 48-hour demand was meant to be final, crushing, absolute. Yet it had failed to break the nation. Instead, it had forged an alliance. It had pushed neighbors closer, not apart. It had turned isolation into solidarity. But, brothers and sisters, let us not mistake survival for salvation. Yes, the mines were still operating. Yes, wages were still flowing in gold-backed slips. Yes, the convoys had arrived. But the arteries of finance were still frozen. The pressure was not gone. It was merely shifting. Every hour past 48 was survival on borrowed time, and every day beyond 72 would demand greater sacrifice. And so the road ahead is not paved with ease. It is paved with struggle. For the empire does not yield quietly, and the machinery of finance does not loosen without consequence. Sabotage still lurks. Sanctions still cut. Headlines still twist the truth. But amidst the weight of it all, a new foundation has been laid. A foundation of defiance, a foundation of unity, a foundation of sovereignty that is written not in theory but in action. Hour 72 arrived, and the streets erupted. Markets opened. Radios played songs of victory. Children waved flags. The empire's 48 had passed into noise, but the 72 stood as law. Traoré addressed the nation with words simple but eternal. We did not ask for permission to be free. We stood and we made it real. And so the question now is not whether Burkina Faso survived 72 hours. The question is whether Africa itself will rise on the back of that survival. Whether other nations will see the proof, the precedent, the path. Will the 72 become a seed of 72 days, 72 months, 72 years of defiance? Or will the empire sharpen its tools, ready its punishments, and strike again with greater force? The clock struck 72. The ultimatum was answered. But tell me, brothers and sisters, was this the end of a standoff or the dawn of a new struggle for Africa's soul? 72 hours. That was the measure, not of time but of will, not of clocks but of courage. Washington had declared its 48, believing it could choke a nation into silence. But Burkina Faso answered with 72, and in doing so, it revealed a truth greater than gold, greater than oil, greater than the empire itself. Sovereignty is not granted. Sovereignty is not given as a favor from the powerful. Sovereignty is seized, defended, lived, hour by hour, day by day, by the hands of miners guarding their stockpiles, by the elders keeping radios alive, by the engineers welding drones into eyes of vigilance, by the farmers who cheered as convoys crossed their fields. Sovereignty is not an idea. It is action. And so, brothers and sisters, what does this mean for us? It means that Traoré's 72-hour ultimatum was not just a local skirmish. It was not just a headline. It was a signal, a trumpet sounding across Africa, calling the continent to remember its own voice. It stood as defiance against empire, as a challenge to the notion that the dollar's clock is the only one that matters. But the empire does not sleep. Even as Burkina Faso stood tall, whispers grew in foreign chambers. Plans sharpened. Strategies hardened. Already some speak of the next strike, the next pressure point, the next push. And among those voices lingers a name. Trump's push for Africa's gold. For the contest is not over resources alone. It is over the right to decide whose hand holds the scales. Here's the road ahead. Fragile, dangerous, uncertain. Yet alive. The 72 proved that a nation can endure. The question now is whether that endurance can become unity, whether unity can become power, and whether power can become a continent reborn. So I ask you, what do you believe? Was this 72-hour stand the victory of one man or the awakening of a people? Was it the end of a countdown or the beginning of a new calendar written in freedom's time? If you believe, type Amen in the comments. If you believe, share your voice. If you believe Africa shall rise, then join this community. Subscribe, stay with us, for this is not the last chapter. This is only the beginning. God bless Burkina Faso. God bless Africa.